It wasn't long ago American President Joe Biden visited Saudi Arabia and met with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The meeting looked friendly, but it did provoke a lot of reaction from the West. A lot of people criticized Biden's move, especially since Biden accuses the Saudi Crown Prince of murdering Jamal Khashoggi, and Biden also promised to turn Saudi Arabia into a pariah state. But we know in this world, money talks. The Western governments mostly use human rights as a weapon. In reality, they don't really care about a godforsaken Saudi journalist. Neither do they care about the innocent children of Yemen when they're selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. And this is the hypocrisy which is out in the open. You can no longer hide it.
Saudis. And of course, oil production is really driving this visit. And you may not see an immediate announcement when President Biden is wheels up from Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia is going to pump more oil.
Today, America needs Saudi Arabia more than Saudi Arabia needs America, and that's the reality of the situation. When Saudi Arabia reduces their oil output, leading to higher prices in America, Biden has become desperate. He's desperate, especially since the midterm elections are around the corner. And today, the Americans are calling for a review of American and Saudi relations. The folks at my local mosque seem to think America might be prepared to invade Saudi Arabia and take all the oil.
We've taken control of the oil in the Middle East, the oil that we're talking about, the oil that everybody was worried about. The US has control of that.
Such a move would be very easy. There's US troops in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is already protected with American weapons in the region. But that's not going to happen, and that's not something anyone should wish for. America must understand that Saudi Arabia, although is a despicable country with an atrocious human rights record and lots of oil that we need in the West, is still a sovereign country, and to punish it just for our own interests is not the right way. Saudi Arabia also needs to think about their own economy and their own people and their own future, and they have every right to decide how much oil they pump and how much they charge.
From the beginning of the administration, since taking office, the president has been very clear that the United States needs a different sort of relationship with Saudi Arabia. He has said that from very early on. And I have said this last week when OPEC made the decision to align their energy policy with Russia's war aims and against the American people, further underscores that reasoning to realign that relationship, to reevaluate that relationship with Saudi Arabia. We are reviewing where we are currently right now, and we'll be watching closely over the coming weeks.
There's just too many problems happening between the Saudis and the Americans. The Americans think Saudi Arabia is cheating on them by being in bed with Russia. Saudi moves in the oil market seems to suggest that they don't really care about Ukraine. Maybe that is the case. If so, then what? Ukraine is not Saudi Arabia's problem, and neither should it be anybody else's problem for that matter. Not the Americans, neither the Brits, neither the Hungarians, not the Finnish either. What's happening in Ukraine is between Ukraine and Russia, and nobody else should get involved. Saudi Arabia is truly in a difficult mess with the Americans at the moment. But who have they got to blame? Only themselves. They have a relationship based solely on oil, and that's the problem. The unholy American and Saudi partnership, which also partnered the evangelical Christians and the Salafi Wahhabis, began more than 70 years ago at a dinner aboard an American ship in the Suez Canal. In 1945, US President Franklin Roosevelt returned from the Yalta Conference and stayed in Egypt to meet with influential leaders in the Middle East, including Egyptian King Farouk and Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. Among the leaders was the first king of Saudi Arabia, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, a very charismatic military leader who defeated his rivals and founded the modern state of Saudi Arabia. And mutual sympathy arose between the Americans and the Saudis. The Americans, of course, represented by Roosevelt, and the Saudis represented by Ibn Saud. They entered into an informal agreement under which the Americans pledged to provide diplomatic support and military training for the kingdom in exchange for political support in the region and access to Saudi oil resources. My friends, Allah has blessed the Muslim world in the Middle East, literally under their feet, loads of oil, and the Saudis have lots of it. Today they are second only to Venezuela in volume, and the quality of oil in Saudi Arabia is second to none. The problem for Saudi Arabia was that they didn't have enough manpower and money to extract the oil back then. Although Britain could have helped the Saudis extract the oil, they didn't. Britain was too busy with its own post-war reconstruction, and the Americans got in there and took advantage of the Saudis. When the boom of Saudi oil refineries finally began, the Americans began to plot. They wanted more from the Saudis. Saudis knew about this and tried to manage the situation. America and Britain blessed a new nation called Israel, and the Saudis woke up for a limited period back then and imposed an oil embargo in 1972 and 1973. They did it against countries that supported Israel. Anyway, the embargo happened under King Faisal, and sadly, he was assassinated and replaced by an American-friendly king. Despite what people say, Saudi Arabia was never pro-Israel, not during King Faisal, not even prior to him. A lot of historians even say when Roosevelt met with Ibn Saud in 1945. The conversation was about the prospect of creating a Jewish state in Palestine, but the Saudi leader at that time sharply opposed. But of course, the Americans always have their way. By hook or crook, they've been getting their way in the Middle East and ruining so many lives. And today, everything has changed. Americans need to wake up because the Saudis have. The Saudi people and their leadership know America is all about milking Saudi Arabia. This is not friendship, this is true enmity. America and Saudi Arabia were never strong allies, not even during the Cold War. The only thing that brought them a little closer was after the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran. Saudi Arabia and America united against Iran. Then of course Saudi Arabia became the main buyer of American weapons by the 1990s, supported the US military-industrial complex thanks to the proceeds from the sale of oil. But the Cold War ended. Today everything is different. Russia and Saudi Arabia are allies in OPEC+. Since the Biden regime wants to restore the nuclear agreement between Iran and the world powers, it's not interested in portraying Iran as an enemy. Yes, the Americans are meddling with the issues with hijab in Iran at the moment, but don't expect any regime change. The Ayatollahs will still be there. Arms sales have lost their attractiveness due to the fact that Saudi still continues to use American weapons in the Yemeni war, a war where nobody has won. The Saudis have realized this too. What the Americans are selling to the Saudis are cheap, and the facts speak for themselves. Saudi Arabia has not been able to defeat the barefooted Yemeni Houthis. The resistance continues. Whatever the connection between Roosevelt and Ibn Saud back then no longer exists. Today's world is a different world, and the relationship between Biden and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is also a different one. Saudi Arabia has every right to reduce oil productions. The Americans need to get used to it. They need to find ways to replace the oil. After all, shouldn't we all be concerned with climate change? What Saudi Arabia is trying to do under Mohammed bin Salman is to squeeze the Americans out step by step. By insisting on a reduction in production under OPEC+, Saudi Arabia not only indirectly supports Russia through this, but also shakes the unstable oil fundamentals of relations with the United States. And if Biden continues to listen to the legislative Democrats, then it's likely that this marriage between Saudi Arabia and America will soon end in a divorce. Thank you for listening to the Independent Islamic Republic of Foreign Policy Hawk. We support all nations, whether Muslim or not, and we welcome all people to comment and provide their opinion as per Sharia law. At present, I'm in the process of transferring my AdSense account on this channel, so adverts aren't showing. The process can take a few days. In the meantime, if you want to support us, consider supporting us through Patreon. Assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem, adios.